Okay, welcome back to the Rough Cuts Garage. Today we're going to be inspecting the wheel bearings on our 1990 Toyota 4Runner. One thing that we were aware of when we were driving following the brake job was on the driver's side, we heard sort of a grinding sound that was happening. It was only happening for part of the wheel rotation. So what we did, or what I did yesterday, was I took apart the driver's side and cleaned up everything, repacked all the wheel bearings and replaced the oil seal, and that seemed to fix the problem. So I figured I'd make a video because I want to do the same thing to the passenger side. So I figured I'd make the video for you guys to help you see what's behind everything and in what order the wheel bearings and seals and everything is supposed to go on. So I'll show you how to take that apart today, and we'll clean up the passenger side. All right, so some parts that you might need. One part you actually will definitely need is a new oil seal. Right here, this one's a Beck Arnley brand, 0523344 is the part number. And this you'll need because you have to take out the old one in order to access the inner wheel bearing. This here is an outer wheel bearing with a race. Unfortunately, these are made in China. The ones that are on the 4Runner now, I believe, are stock, so they're made in Japan and they're actually nice quality. In the kit, it comes with a wheel bearing and a race. Now, this is the outer wheel bearing. I wasn't able to get inner wheel bearings from Lordco, so I doubt I'm gonna need a replacement. If I do, then I'll go pick one up. I'll try and find the right inner wheel bearing replacement and then include it in the description below. So right here, I've got some Lucas brand multi-purpose marine grade grease. This is what I'm gonna use to pack the wheel bearings and cover all of the inner components so that they don't rust and are well lubricated. So I've got the vehicle jacked up here with a jack stand underneath the passenger side. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is remove the brake pads and remove the caliper from the rotor. Feel free to check out the link above to learn how to replace the brake pads on a second gen 4Runner. So the first step is to remove these clips. Now this clip, you can pop it out like this, and then there's these two pins. You're going to pop those out. Next, you can just slide your brake pads out the back of the caliper. Now would be a good time to inspect them. These ones I just replaced, so they should be good. You've got one 19mm bolt here, and you can see this bracket has the brake line on it, and another 19mm bolt right there. So you're gonna have to remove those two. And then following that, on the back of the caliper, you've got one bolt here and one bolt up here, and that holds your caliper on to this steering section here. Just one point to note, you may have to steer the wheel back and forth to gain access to the bolts depending on where they are and what tool you're using. Bracket out of the way there, and then now this is free to move around. So I've got some mechanics wire here in preparation to hang the caliper out of the way so it doesn't put any stress on the brake lines. One bolt. There's two. So now we can just lift off the caliper, and you can see there the hard line that goes into this bracket. This is held on by the two big 19mm bolts that we pulled out. So now we can hang the caliper out of the way and not kink it because it has this section of flexible hose here. All right, so I've got the caliper hanging out of the way there. So first thing we need to do is get behind this cap here. So I'm just gonna take a screwdriver and a hammer and find a little notch. Pop that off. Next, we're gonna take off this nut here. It's 12mm. Okay, so now we're gonna remove the flange. There's these 6 nuts here that we need to remove. They're 12mm. Next thing we have to do, there's a washer there. There's another washer. And then there's these cone washers that will pop out. So what I like to do is I take it on the side, smack it with a hammer, and the cone washers should start popping out. Just like that. Okay, and then you can pop this flange off. One part that you may also need is there's a gasket around here. This one doesn't seem like it's too bad, but you can get replacements for them. I'll link them in the description below. All right, next step, there's a snap ring here. There's a snap ring, and then there's this washer here. So I don't have the proper sized socket. Basically what's gonna happen is I use a screwdriver to bang in the corner. It's bad, I know, but I don't have the proper tool yet. What you'll see, I'll pop a diagram here, is there's like a nut, then there's a sort of a lock washer with tabs that fold over so that these don't back off. Then there's another nut behind that one. And so what I do is I take a screwdriver, and I don't know if you can see it here, but right there is where it folds over this nut. So you bend that back. So you bend that back far enough so that you can actually back off this nut here. So there's one. So you can see you bend the tabs over to lock. There's the second one. Washer here. And you've got your wheel bearing right here. So that'll pop off. I'm gonna try not to drop the wheel bearing and all the rest. There's the outer wheel bearing. Then the inner wheel bearing is in here. Okay, so what you're gonna have to do now is remove this inner seal. One useful tool is a seal puller, looks like this. And what you do is you grip it under the seal and you pull it up. And the unfortunate thing is, even if your seal is good, you're probably gonna end up destroying it. So always have a backup ready to go. There you go, there's your inner seal. And then now you can grab your inner wheel bearing right there, and then we can clean up the inside of this, clean up the wheel bearings, clean up all the other components, and then replace it with fresh grease. right, so we've got all the parts cleaned up here. We've got all of the grease cleaned up out of the axle hub here, and I've inspected the races. As you can see here, this part right here is the inner wheel race. There's another one right there for the outer, and that's what the wheel bearings ride on. So those are inspected, they're clean, there's no rust, there's no pitting, so I'm gonna keep those. I've inspected the wheel bearings here. You can see maybe a little bit of like surface rust on the inside there, but that should be fine. All of the bearings here are in good condition, they roll nicely. Same with the inner wheel bearing as well. So everything looks like it's in fairly good condition. So the spindle here, it's important that this is very smooth and clean. So I got all the grease off, and then what I did was I took a little, I believe this is a 000 steel wool tampon, and I went around and polished up the metal where the seals run, and basically just the whole spindle here minus the threads. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is start packing my wheel bearings. So I'm gonna take my grease, load it up in your palm like that, and then I'm gonna do my inner wheel bearing first because I'm gonna have to install that one first. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your palm, get it in your palm, and you're gonna shove it in the end and try and push it in so that it eventually pops out the other side. So you're gonna go around and you're just gonna try and jam it in the back side here, and then hopefully it'll start coming out the front side, and you're just gonna try and fill the wheel bearing with grease by pushing it in. All right, so I'm gonna layer some grease on the inside of the axle hub here, making sure to put a thin layer along all of the bearing races, and then pack a little bit on the inside of the hub, not too much, but just enough so that it can circulate as the wheel turns around and that everything's properly coated. All right, so now what we're gonna do is set the inner wheel bearing into the hub, just like that. And then what we're gonna do is put the oil seal on top. So there's two sides to these. One of them has an opening down here with a spring, and the other one has just sort of like a piece of rubber that runs along the inside. It's supposed to go in like that, not like that. So if you can see this extra gold lip here, then you're putting it on backwards. So this oil seal here doesn't come with thread lock on the outside, so I'm going to take some red thread lock and apply it myself. Another thing to note is I cleaned up the surface that the thread lock is going to mate to. So I'm going to apply my thread lock and then place it on the hub. And now you can get like a tool that presses, like it's the same diameter and it presses down. I'm just going to use a block of wood and a hammer. So what we're gonna do now is you're gonna try and not catch the seal on any part of the spindle here until it gets to the back part. You don't wanna catch it or wreck the rubber on the inside of it right here. So you're gonna lift it up, try and keep it as straight on as possible, seat it to the back, and then you're gonna load in the outer wheel bearing. Again, try not to touch the back side of the brake rotor because you just cleaned it. So I cleaned up this washer here with the steel wool. You can see it's got a notch in here, and there's a notch on top of the spindle there. So I already greased it, and now I'm just gonna push it back. So here's the adjusting nut. Now we're gonna screw that on. Basically what the factory service manual says is you tighten down the adjusting nut to 43 foot-pounds. You rotate the wheel 2 or 3 times, and then you loosen the nut off and then tighten it to 18 foot-pounds, and then that way it's set and the wheel bearings having a chance to align themselves. So what I'm going to do, again, I don't have the specialty tool, but what I'm going to do is just go down and whack it with a screwdriver until it's good and tight, rotate the wheel, back it off, and then I'm going to hit it a few times, just not as hard as the first time. So we're going to tighten it down to 43 foot-pounds. Okay, that's roughly 43 foot-pounds. Rotate the wheel a few times. We're going to back off the nut. There we go. And then we're going to tighten the nut again. Just not as tight as the first time to get it roughly to 18 foot-pounds. There we go. Next, we're going to throw on the lock washer, the one with the tabs, and then we'll throw on the lock nut. All right, so we've put our lock washer on there. The tab has been folded over the adjusting nut, and now we're going to take our lock nut, put it on, and then it's supposed to be torqued down to 35 foot-pounds. Go. We fold this tab over so that both nuts are locked in place. So you can see what I did here. This is the lock nut here. Here's the little tabs folded over, and back there is your adjusting nut, and then even farther in there you can see the thrust washer. So the next parts that we're going to add is this washer, the snap ring that holds your CV axle in place inside the hub, and then we're going to throw the flange, the cone washers and nuts back on, this end nut, and then the cap. All right, so now I'm going to bring the brake caliper back over. And then this bracket here will swing back up over here. Okay, now we can put the other bolt in. And then we can also put the caliper bolts back on the back here. So the bolts that hold on the steering knuckle arm, the part that's connected to the tie rod there, they need to be torqued down to 135 foot-pounds. The bolts holding the caliper on need to be torqued down to 90 foot-pounds. All right, next thing we're going to do is put the brake pads back in. You may need to compress the caliper pistons just enough to get the pads back in. You'll notice here that the pads are not the same. The one with the clip at the bottom here is going to go on the inside, just like this. And this one will come in like this. Then you want to grab your 2 pins. I like to put a little bit of grease on them. Throw that one in the top. And this one, you're going to need to take this clip and pop it in the holes here. And then your pin slides through. There we go. Okay, so the clip comes like this. And then these are supposed to hook in these little holes behind the pad. And then this pin here goes in like this. And then you gotta line it up with the holes inside the pins. Hook that in like that. So this right here is the orientation in which all the clips and pads and pins go in. All right, so these nuts are going to be torqued down to 23 foot-pounds, and this one is 13 foot-pounds. Got my wife inside the 4Runner to apply the brakes. That way it won't move when I torque them down. So all these have been torqued down to 23 foot-pounds, and this one down to 13 foot-pounds. Don't forget to put on this cap here. And again, that's 100 foot-pounds. All right, so that right there completes the job of inspecting and greasing up the wheel bearings on a 1990 Toyota 4Runner. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.